The following presentation was recorded live at the Richmond Marriott in Richmond, Virginia for the 29th Annual International Association of Square Dance Callers Convention. This is tape number 3, Orientation Session.
CALLERLAB Convention here in Richmond, Virginia. My name is Gregg Anderson. I'm here mainly as an MC and comic relief to get things underway here because I don't remember anything about what we need to talk about. And I told Jerry Reed that at the home office when he asked me to do this. But I'm from Colorado, and we have on our panel this evening to tell you a little bit about the background of CALLERLAB in its multiple decades now of its existence, and to tell you about some of the things that have been going on at this convention, in case it's been a long time since you've been to a convention, or in case this is the first time. Just by a show of hands, who is here at a CALLERLAB convention for the first time this year? Wonderful! Look at the turnout. Well, we're just delighted to have you. Real pleased that you're here. We have on our panel Bev Sutter. Over on my far left is the chairman of the Partners Committee, and her husband Dave is around here somewhere. Dave's back in there in the middle of the muddle. And they're from Iowa, and like I say, chairing the Partners Committee. So Bev will have some information for all the partners during this orientation session this evening. Also, along with us on the panel, Freddie and John Kaltenthaler from Pennsylvania. Freddie and John have been a part of CALLERLAB for a long, long time. John was the first executive at that time. It was executive director, I believe. No, executive. The name title has changed. Executive secretary and executive director. But John occupied that position for a very long time, and then in more recent years has been serving on the board of governors. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to John and let him start. Please, at any time, we'll allow John to allow appropriate points, and Bev as well, points in the presentation to allow you to ask questions. And at those appropriate times, if you would do us a favor, because we are recording this session, if you would step forward, we have an extra microphone here so that we can get the questions on tape. And this will be a rule throughout the convention at any session that you are in, because they are being taped by Convention Tapes International, so that you can purchase these tapes later in case you have to miss certain sessions. Please do not ask questions or make comments unless you are on a microphone. There's nothing more frustrating, boring, etc. for a caller who has bought a tape to hear all this dead sound because someone is trying to talk from the audience without a microphone. So we would ask your cooperation in that. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to John Kaltenthaler.
Thank you, Greg. When Greg talks about making sure that you ask questions on the tape, we have had an ongoing project to select the best of CALLERLAB tapes, which go back to 1980. And we had to consolidate all the tapes. There were 37 tapes on teaching alone. And if you can imagine the difficulty we have when there's silence on the tape. And invariably what you hear, oh, I can project, I'm a caller. And what do you hear in the tape? They don't do it. So if you do have a question, seriously, please make sure it's on the microphone. And as Greg says, that applies to all sessions that are being taped. And if you look at your mini schedule on the convention handout, they are marked with an asterisk, and the asterisk says this session is being taped. Well, when did CALLERLAB start? The planning for CALLERLAB started with the Sets in Order American Square Dance Society Hall of Fame members, and they met in the 1970s, 70, 71, maybe 72, and they decided they wanted to form an organization to establish some guidelines for the activity. The first convention was planned for and conducted in 1974 in St. Louis at a Marriott facility. And when they had their first convention, the Board of Governors came up with some, and that consisted of 23 members. They decided they would invite, by personal invitation, each of those 23 people could invite 5 callers. And our first convention had 104 callers in attendance and several partners as well. And they said that they would endorse the Sets in Order American Square Dance Society Hall of Fame, the Caller Teacher Manual for the basic and extended basic programs and for American square dancing. They said they would appoint a committee to prepare and recommend a curriculum for an approved 5-day callers leadership course. They also established 15 statements which they thought would involve the activity. The first statement was, let's put the dance back into square dancing. An accepted form of standardization is vital to the continuance and growth of the activity. In those days, caller teacher leadership training should be the responsibility of the caller teacher. Well, big deal. I mean, so much that you hear at this time is motherhood and apple pie. Professional standards for callers must be established. And if you try to establish what a caller should be, one of the things that you can't get agreement on is a list of items. But the one thing that was in agreement by most of the people who were there was the fact that we needed a set of ethics, so we established a code of ethics. Today's square dancing, this is back in 1974, is due for a reappraisal. The selfish exploitation of square dancing should be discouraged. So far, there's nothing that you can't agree with. And the over-organization of dancer leader groups can pose a problem for the future of the activity. We acknowledge the club caller system of activity in square dance clubs and callers for those clubs. The National Square Dance Convention is missing the boat. What can CALLERLAB do to be of help to the caller leaders in the activity? The need for better communication. The need for an experimental movements to control them, because in those days, every caller had his favorite calls. And you'd work for an hour or two in an evening to learn that call from a variety of arrangements and formations, and you'd never hear it again. So they had to come up with something which they had to develop. And if you can imagine people like Frank Lane, Jerry Haig, Marshall Flippo, Arnie Cronenberger, Vaughn Parrish, having a discussion in the hallways of the Marriott Hotel in St. Louis, trying to figure out where they were going to put the hands. Hands up, hands down. And there was a meeting where they were talking about hands up, hands down. And this beautiful young lady here in the front was in the meeting sitting directly in front of me. In case you don't know who I'm talking about, it's Jean Parrish. She made the comment that she didn't think some other people heard, in which she said, I don't care where a man puts his hands as long as he's gentle. Vaughn was in the next room and said, I wonder what Jean said now. So, for all the seriousness of the organization and all the good intentions of everything that these 23 leaders had done in the organization of that first convention for 1974, you still had time to be friendly and loving with one another. And I think you'll find that that's one of the beautiful parts of CALLERLAB, is the friendships that you make and the genuine love that you develop for your fellow callers and their partners, of course. Anyhow, this first convention came about, and while these 15 points that I talked about were the goals and the objectives of the original 23 members of the board, it didn't all come easy. Some of the things that, if you think about trying to define the basic moves of our programs that we have, yeah, they were written up in the Sets and Order Handbook, but we didn't have complete agreement. And we had to massage these. And they would get these definitions, and they would have committee meetings that would go on, and the board would meet for on. And they would try to establish, can we get agreement on this? Some of these things took multiple years in order to develop them. The first Board of Governors election took place in 1975. And the first year, Bob Osgood had been the executive secretary, and the second year, Stan Burdick volunteered to do it. And the third year, Bob Osgood did it again, and I was selected as the first full-time paid executive secretary. And it was an experience. Freddie was the unpaid cleaning lady because the office was in my home. And when I told her that I was elected the executive secretary, her comment was not congratulations. Her comment was, there goes the guest room. That's exactly what happened. Okay, what have we done since 1974? Well, obviously the dance programs that we've established, and not everyone says that they're perfect. We acknowledge that. We're still wrestling with those programs today. We're still having people say, why did you drop this? Why did you add that? But if you go back and look at the mainstream program and you take a look at the dates that these things were part of it and when they were added to it, you look to see how many days, any dates are listed by calls since 1974. There were only 2. That in itself is a remarkable achievement when you think about it. Well, it wasn't just dance programs. We mentioned that one of the 15 statements was to try to control the stem of experimental moves so that we would all be working from the same page in the book. And when they did this, they established the quarterly selection programs. They established this for the mainstream program, and even though we didn't have it named yet, they established it for the plus program and subsequently the advanced program as well. They did indeed establish the code of ethics. And all of you, I'm sure, have seen copies of that, but if not, that's posted upstairs on the bulletin boards at the head of the escalators. You can see that. I guess that's this floor, isn't it? No, we're down a floor. Yeah, it's up one floor then. They came up with a caller teacher accreditation program. Now, the original program took about, I guess, 2, maybe 3 years to develop, and that has since been curtailed, and they have now developed a subsequent caller teacher accreditation program, which was just approved last year. So that's in the process. But they also had a mini, well, not a mini convention, but an extended committee meeting in Dallas-Fort Worth area back about 1980. And this was the prominent caller coaches of the time, the people who were training callers all over the world. And we sat down and we tried to develop a set of guidelines that would say, these are the topics that should be covered in a caller school. And we developed that of the curriculum guidelines for caller education. Well, it's very easy to make a list and say, these are the topics that you should cover. But what do you have to include in those topics? How much detail do you have to include? What sort of training should we be giving to the callers who are just starting out? For those of you who have been calling more than, let's see, if 1974, that's 28 years ago, if any of you had been calling over 30 years, there was an awful lot of stuff that wasn't written. Everybody had their little black book. You can't see my book, that's my stuff. If I show you my book, you'll be as good as I am, maybe even better. Callers were secretive. Not after CALLERLAB started. What happened was callers began to share. Callers began to write. And we had some excellent writers in the organization. People who could put pen to paper or to computer or whatever, and they could quantify and list the things that should be covered. Subsequent to that, we had a second meeting in Chicago where we refined the original list and came up with the published curriculum guidelines, which is now one of the items that we have as an item for sale. And subsequent to that date, we published a technical supplement to that, which fleshes out the subject matter and the overall content and gives more of a narrative as to how to do some of these things. They came up with a caller coach accreditation program. That is a rather exhausting program in which a person who has been calling a minimum of 10 years, a caller who has been teaching a minimum of 5 of the complete curriculum guidelines courses, either on a 5-day school or on a home program with a one-on-one, or some other method of conducting all of those 21 subjects which were included. And if they're eligible, then they are given the opportunity to take a written test consisting of 110 questions, of which they must get 100 correct. A rather high standard, but certainly not one which was impossible. To date, we have accredited more than 28 caller coaches, and that's a remarkable achievement. And if you try to read down that list, again, a list which is posted upstairs, it reads like the who's who of the caller trainers. They established multiple caller training programs. They developed books for standard applications. And by standard applications, some callers said, "Oh, you're trying to restrict me as to what I can call." Nothing could be further from the truth. What we're saying is, if you are teaching people, these are the minimum standards that you should set for your classes. If you teach from these formations and these arrangements, there is a reasonable likelihood of success on the part of the dancers. Only in the dictionary does success come before work. If we as callers don't do our jobs, we're not going to be successful with our dancers, and they're not going to reflect well on what we've done. They came up with choreographic guidelines, what the callers should be doing. If some of you remember back to about 88 or 89, a little thing came up that some of the clubs got letters from BMI and ASCAP. And they said, "Hey, you guys are using copyrighted music. You need to be licensed." And if you remember, it was going to cost every club a large sum of money in order to do that. CALLERLAB met with BMI and met with ASCAP, and they negotiated an agreement where we could license the callers, license the teachers, that for a very nominal fee, we would be able to use all of the music that is controlled by BMI and ASCAP. You would not believe the abuse that the square dance population wanted to foist onto CALLERLAB. They said, "Why did CALLERLAB have to mess around with that?" The answer is that it would have cost most clubs in excess of $2,000 a year in order to get the license to use the copyrighted music. In conflict with that is the fact that we could get the caller's license for about $50 a year. Now, what do you think is the better deal? Each club having to spend $2,000, which they don't have, or to let the callers pick up the $50 that it cost them to license? Now, of course, it's gone up since that time, but you have to remember this was about 14 or 15 years ago. That's a major accomplishment of CALLERLAB. And when CALLERLAB put this out and had that secured that agreement, our membership increased dramatically because callers said, "Yeah, we have that obligation." And we think that's been an overwhelming success. We established the CALLERLAB Foundation for the preservation of square dancing, for the promotion of the square dancing. We have established overseas mini-labs and area mini-labs. We've had 2 mini-labs over in Australia. We had 1 mini-lab up in Bangor, Maine. We have another mini-lab scheduled for Germany. And these are ways, and we had another one over in England. And these are ways in which we take the CALLERLAB convention to the other areas so that it is easier for people to join CALLERLAB and easier for people to meet some of the leaders of today. And we think that these are major accomplishments. CALLERLAB, when they first started, had newsletters, periodic newsletters without a set schedule of a monthly publication, but generally speaking, about 5, 6, maybe 7 times a year. And they established scholarships for caller education of needy callers, scholarships to help the people who were overseas and didn't have the same degree of access. And we have given scholarships to not only callers in North America, but in Europe, Australia, Canada, and we think that this is part of the sharing of the ideas of the profession and this art and science of calling. In 1980, CALLERLAB began to tape a number of the caller training sessions with Convention Tapes International, and that's been an overwhelming success. Not only are the tapes of high quality, but they're also reasonably priced. CALLERLAB has a number of committees that you can serve on. And when we say that, what is involved with serving on any committee? Notifying the administrative staff, the office upstairs, if you will, that you'd like to serve on the committee. Are there any restrictions? Sure. If you want to serve on the advanced committee, you have to be calling the advanced program. Duh. Not really a brain rocket scientist exercise to say you should be calling the program if you want to serve on the committee. Similarly, if you want to serve on the caller training committee, you should be training callers. Otherwise, how are you going to make suggestions? Do you know what's needed if you're not doing it? We have a caller coach committee. In order to be on that committee, you have to be an accredited caller coach. Who can serve on the Board of Governors? Anybody who has been a member of CALLERLAB for a period of 3 years. There are 25 members of the Board of Governors. They serve a 3-year term, and it's an honor to be elected to the board, but it's also a lot of work. This year, the executive committee had 64 emails they had to reply to. All of the board members had some number, I think somewhere around 26 or 27. Well, that doesn't sound like much, but if you're like me in my email, if I go 5 days without checking my email, I might have in excess of 100 emails. A lot of them are from CALLERLAB, but a lot of them are just plain whatever. You can put your own word to that. 6 members of the Board of Governors make up the executive committee of CALLERLAB, and they are elected by the board, the chairman, a vice chairman, 3 members at large, and the executive director of CALLERLAB, who is a non-voting member. The categories of membership have been defined over the years in that we have apprentice members, associate members, we have licensees with insurance and licensees without insurance, we have active members, and we have gold card or life members. What that means is that we have established a criteria by which anyone who is interested in calling can indeed become active in CALLERLAB. We would encourage every one of you, if you're not on a committee but have a particular interest in some aspect of calling, that you sign up for the committee and be an active committee participant. We have a rule which I think is very reasonable. It says if you are on a committee and you are sent correspondence and you do not answer 2 correspondence in a row, you're dropped from that committee. Again, that's just common sense and good business practice, isn't it? Because your dues are paying for all that postage. Why should we send stuff out to people who aren't going to serve on committee? I think these things are self-fulfilling and certainly easy to understand why we established that. The administration of CALLERLAB is conducted by an executive director and a home office staff of people whom the executive director hires and who work for the executive director. The executive director works for the Board of Governors, and they have control over the executive director. The home office has a paid staff, and part of that is health benefits, retirement benefits, Social Security, and all those other good things that go with being an employer. They use modern office technology. They have computers, and they back up with the computer files and the databases and all those other good things, and they maintain all this stuff at a very nominal cost to us. They publish the financial journals, and it comes out, and they're there for examination of anyone who wants to see what happens. Interestingly enough, the CALLERLAB Board of Governors is also the Board of Governors for the CALLERLAB Foundation for the preservation and promotion of square dancing. Same Board of Governors, same executive committee, same chairman, same executive director, separate bylaws, separate accounting. It's a hands-off. It's not an Arthur Anderson kind of thing. We have the accounting for the foundation, and one of the things that you'll hear about tomorrow morning is this year's fundraising efforts for the foundation, which is a raffle ticket. And you'll see that one of the prizes is a convention fee for a CALLERLAB member, which is good up till 2007. There's another second raffle drawing, which is a mini disc, and the third one is a zero briefcase, which is a value of $850. We've put out videos for square dancing. We put out one early on called Couch Potatoes, and periodically they'll have videos sometimes of the after party things, which will take place after this session here tonight. When you are attending this CALLERLAB convention, we would urge you to speak up if you have a question, to contribute your ideas and your views, not necessarily of saying, in my area, this is what I do. We don't need a bunch of things like that. But if you have a sincere question, get on the microphone. If the session is being taped, ask the question. You'll find that all of the callers here, even the members of the Board of Governors, even the chairman of the board, they dress the same as you and I. They have the same problems in square dancing as you and I. They have the same fragile egos as you and I. And all of us have a degree of insecurity. How many of you have ever heard of a caller by the name of Bob Van Antwerp? Yes? Bob Van Antwerp asked me one time, he says, John, did I meter that right? And I said, wait a minute, Bob, you're asking me if you metered that right? Yeah, we all have that insecurity. Marshall Flippo recorded a recording one night in which he did a scoot back and roll. You remember that one? He did that about 15 years ago. And he caught so much flack over the fact that he did and roll, which in those days was not allowable, that for the next 5 records that he was getting ready to cut, he called the home office and said, John, can I call this legally? This is Marshall Flippo. And you sit there and say, these are the superstars of the day. And yet they're the same as you and I. They are active members in good standing. And they have the time to sit there and chat with you, to commiserate with you, but they need to know what you're thinking. They need to know what your questions are. And we encourage all of you, as I mentioned, join the committees. Ask the questions. But if the session is being taped, please use a microphone so that your session gets on the tape itself, the question gets on the tape, and the answer does get on the tape. I don't care how well you think you project. It has to be on the tape clearly. And when we did the review of the tapes for the Best of Conventions, I hate to tell you how many of the tapes had blank spots. And yeah, you could hear the person on the microphone say, so-and-so, would you please come up and use the microphone? I can project, you hear this saying, and then you don't hear anything at all on the tape. So please use the microphone so that it gets on the tape. Now, the other thing that I would urge all of you to do, if you're here with your partner, you go to one session of your choice, let your partner go to another session. Cool it, kids.
Don't steal Bev's material.
I'm not going to steal their material. I want you to do that. Bev's going to talk about that to a greater extent than I. But please don't both go so you can sit and hold hands together. You'll get a lot more out of it. Yes, if you've got a session which is being taped, you can buy the tape, and we would encourage that because they are good quality tapes. But ask the questions. Attend as many of those as you can, as many of the sessions. At committee meetings, you don't have to be a member of that committee to attend it. There are Board of Governors sessions, which are for you to ask questions of the board members. There are caller coach sessions, which are informal, in which you have any questions about caller training. You'll have some accredited caller coaches there to answer your questions. You'd think she was the timer, wouldn't you? We're doing fine here. We're about right.
We're about right.
Okay? Anybody have any questions on any material that I've covered? If not, I'm going to turn it back to Gregg, and he'll tell the rest of you.
Thank you, John. John is a wealth of information because of his many years of devoted service to CALLERLAB, and we shut him aside at this point, but we're going to bring him back a little bit later with some other things, I suspect. At this point, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Bev Sutter, the chairman of the Callers Partner Committee. And Bev is going to fill in all the partners on many things, and also the callers are allowed to keep their ears open so they know what their partners are up to. Bev?
That would be a good idea. First, let me apologize. I've had laryngitis since December 20th, so if words don't come out but the mouth is moving, I actually am trying to say something. In arriving at CALLERLAB, the first thing that we do is we get the little mini schedule, and we think, well, that sounds interesting, then look it up or go through the directions book. But the first thing I usually check is, where's the food? It's in these rooms right here. I got them marked. That's Basic Needs, right? 101. Okay. John had mentioned about these callers that you like Bob Osgood, who just came in, and Marshall Flippo and John Kaltenthaler, all these, when we were first starting in square dancing, were the guys, the big guys. They're all very approachable. They're all really nice. And they're probably just as afraid of you as you are of them. Because you may ask them something and they're going to go, you know, they should know that, and they don't. So they're all right. I don't pull any punches. One thing that we all have is we all have a job. And no job is more important than somebody else's. They just have different responsibilities. Someone told me that, and you can apply that to this CALLERLAB convention with every session, with every caller, with every partner, and even with the people who have come to visit us as special VIPs. Other things that we do is, like John mentioned, don't go to the same sessions. We bring highlighter markers. I've got mine marked. He'll mark his, and then we trade. And we find out that, oh, he's going to that one. Maybe I'd like this one better, or he'd like that other one better, so that we divide up. We take notes. Even now, listening to John, I've taken a couple of notes. Then when we get back to our room at night, if we haven't invited anybody, we usually do. I don't know how many Iowa callers are here, but we would first invite them because we're from Iowa. And come to our room. Let's talk about what we learned today, what we saw. People learn through seeing, hearing, and doing. And if we can get people into these little tiny itty-bitty conventions in your room, you can talk about things and go, you know, I heard him say that, but I didn't understand it. And then they'll tell you what they heard or saw, and you can get it more understanding from it just by going back over it with somebody else that's been to the same meeting. This year, I think we're going to have to reach out a little further because I don't know of any other Iowa callers, but we'll go back to our room tomorrow night and Tuesday night and invite some people to come up that have been to the same meetings that we've been to or different meetings, and hopefully they will come up with some ideas that we've never heard of before. The other thing I want to mention as a partner, every so often, callers get a directions newsletter. Don't let him or her throw it away before you see it. We have had some partner things in there, and one gentleman, the caller, gave his partner the page with the caller's partner's information on it right before he was ready to throw it out. So as partners, we would hope that you would read those. Well, I could try to keep them short. Little blips on what partners are doing. Partners are the partners of a caller. That doesn't mean they're all women. There are some men. There's some very good lady callers who have some men that come to join us on these things. We tried to get a bus tour of Richmond, and we needed 30. We got 11, so we had to cancel it. So please read the notes. We're going to go to San Antonio next year. Is that correct? And I've already gotten some information from them, so watch your directions, newsletters, and you'll see what's going on. With this convention, try not to go to the same ones. Try to compare notes when you get back to your room. And if you see somebody who has a badge on in a certain committee that you are interested in something in, or you want to be on the committee, talk to them. What are you doing this? Why, is there something we can do to help? As far as partner committee members, I was one for 5 years and didn't know it. Didn't do anything except show up at the sessions and have a good time. So partners committee is real easy to belong to. So I would hope that I would see some of you at the partners sessions. Anything else any questions about being a partner, being a CALLERLAB? Right.
I'm just reminding, read the CALLERLAB big program describing what the partners are doing too, because we aren't going on a tour, but we have some good sessions, excellent sessions, and I think there's one with a resuscitani, whatever, a CPR, I haven't reviewed my CPR for probably 8 years, so I'm looking forward to that. And, there were some great things. Bev's doing a super job. While we're here, being a partner is a very delightful thing to be. So.
Yeah. You can do things that go home and say, we did this in the partner session. We talked about this. I thought I was the only one that had this problem. Come to find out, all of them do. Just that we never get a chance to talk to each other about it. Our sessions are going to be Mondays, only one session, because we were hoping we'd do a trip. Roy Gata is going to bring some materials, and we're going to learn how to read maps. It's not go to the blue line, and we're going to go down on the red one, and over here on the white one. That's not exactly what a good navigator would do for anyone. And everyone is welcome to come to that. You don't have to be just a partner. Then you're short on cord. You're not short on height, but you're short on cord.
Bev, I just wanted to interject one item you mentioned about map reading. There's a story that I heard a long time ago. One of the famous callers when I was getting started calling was Bruce Johnson from California. And I heard the story about, apparently at that time, Bruce's wife did all his bookings. And she had him going to some outlandish distances to get from a dance on a Friday night to a Saturday night. And it apparently was causing some problems, and him barely making it to the dance. And he talked to his wife about it, and then she said, well, it was just this far on the map.
That's
with their fingers
inch
about
between,
an inch apart. And so that's probably going to be a very good session.
And if you look at any atlas, the map of California versus the map of Alaska, they look about the same size, but distances are going to be greater and less per inch, so you got to learn how to read those little graphics on the side. Tuesday, we have an excellent session with Ann Wass. She's going to do a presentation with things as well as dresses and things that she's brought along for visual purposes on the history of square dance apparel for women. And it has been presented to the costumers of the United States. So if she can do it for them, she's going to do a really good job for us. The session on CPR. American Red Cross, after I had told the office that I'd like to do a CPR session, American Red Cross came out with a national information thing for the news, national news, and that was 78% of the time the person you're going to do CPR on is someone you know. Now, if you look around this room, we're all getting to that age where it's going to be, if we're not going to take care of our health because we have to ride in that car so often and we don't spend as much time in the car as we should in the gym, versus, of course, I'm one to talk about that, but you never know when you're going to have to do it, whether it be for your partner or it be for some family member. It could be for a dancer. Someone just told me this evening they'd seen 2 different people die at their dances because nobody knew how to do CPR. What we're going to teach is just enough that you can do something for that person until the right help gets there. And the person you save may be your partner. So that's why we wanted to do that. And the last one is just a information partners session, just informal. Nothing's going to be taped at that one, and we're just going to talk and visit, and what do you want to have for next time, next year in San Antonio, and et cetera. But partners are also very important to the callers here by going to different meetings, at home and on the road, and talking to the people at the dances when the caller doesn't have time or he's missed somebody. So partners are the better half of the calling team. Thanks.
Or the better 1/3 in some cases.
Thank you, Bev. John, I'm going to turn it over to you in just a moment, but I want to make this group as much a part of the convention as can possibly happen on their very first trip to a CALLERLAB convention. There was a phrase that became a part of CALLERLAB's lexicon many years ago that John Kaltenthaler was the author of. This is a very important phrase. It applies to how conventions are run when it comes to our meals. And I want you will probably hear this phrase explained at the opening session tomorrow, and I want you as first-time conventioneers to be fully aware of it so you can take part with the audience response. Now, John, if you would please explain that particular phrase to them.
No badge, no meal, no exceptions. No badge, no mail, no exceptions. I got to tell you a little story that happened on the CALLERLAB mini convention up in Bangor, Maine. Freddie and I had been on a weekend before, and we had to finish that weekend at noon and drive from northeastern Pennsylvania up to Bangor, Maine for the mini lab. Well, we arrived at the dinner meal when they were eating their dessert, and they saw me walk into the room. Guess what they greeted me with? No badge, no mail, no exception. And some of the people who were attending their first CALLERLAB convention said, "What's funny about that?" I couldn't tell them.
And they're serious.
Oh, they're very serious about it. One of the things that some of you, especially the first-timers, may be wondering is, what are the various ribbons? Are some of these people dressed like peacocks or what? The red ribbon indicates a board member. The all red ribbon also indicates a member of the executive committee. The blue ribbon, the dark blue, indicates if they are a committee chairman or a vice chairman. And the pale yellow, I guess that's close, is a panelist or someone who is going to be a speaker. There is also a gold ribbon, which Mr. Osgood is wearing. If you look at his ribbon, it says life member. This is an honorary position which has been given out to only 8 people. And during the course of the convention, you will see certain awards which are given out, awards of excellence. They have attaboy certificates for people who have done some work for CALLERLAB during the previous year. And there may be some milestone awards, which is the highest award which CALLERLAB gives out on Tuesday nights. They will give out the quarter century awards, which signify people who have been calling for a period of 25 years or more. And there are a few callers who have earned a 50-year certificate, Mr. Osgood being one, and I believe, Gloria, you have one too, don't you? Gloria also has received the milestone awards. And these are significant awards, and there are books describing those, and Bob Osgood has made a booklet on the CALLERLAB award recipients that really lets you get to know the person. It's not a complete biography by any means, but it certainly gives you some of the highlights of what that caller has done during his or her career. We haven't given it out to that many Canadians. I think there are about 2 of you now that have from Canada, and of course a number from the U.S. and overseas. We had one from Australia that received the milestone award. So read about these things. Take a look at some of the things over there on the head of the escalators about the CALLERLAB booklets and the promotions, and see the items that they have for sale items. These things are things which some of us would give it our eye teeth way back when we were learning how to call, because it wasn't written then, and it is now. The sharing, the fellowship of CALLERLAB members is something to behold, something which I think all of you will cherish. And not only do you have the opportunity to meet with these people and share ideas, but you'll find out that they have some questions from you as well. Enjoy your convention. Don't be cowed. Don't be afraid to ask, because the only dumb question is the one that you're afraid to ask. Ask the questions. You'll find that the callers, and both male and the female callers, are perfectly willing to share what they know with you. And there's a couple of things up there on the tape book, the for sale item book, where they have women and callers singing calls. If you are the women callers, you'll find that this is an invaluable tape that give you singing calls which may be in your range, that was never available till this past year. Things on education, things on teaching. It's a whole raft of things on the art and science of calling. Greg?
I just wanted to make sure at this point, if we have some questions, we'd love to entertain those questions at this point. So feel free, if there's anything particular on your mind that you'd like to ask, I'll make sure you get the microphone. So please don't be bashful. If you have a question of any kind, I'll give you one more opportunity before the evening's over with, but I'm going to give you one right now. And if any hands out there, please come right forward to the microphone. Typical way when you have a question or a comment is to state your name and the state or province or country that you are from.
My name is Al Shaw. I'm from Boise, Idaho, and I'm with Round the Lab. How did you guys come up with the name CALLERLAB?
There's a question for the historian. Take it, John.
Obviously, our profession was square dance calling, and they decided that the gathering of people to discuss things in conjunction with the art and science of calling was kind of in a laboratory type environment. And aside on that, in 1980, one of our topics was programming for survival in the 20th century, or 21st century. Well, the people in Miami, if you remember 1980, this Cold War was still going on. And they're kind of saying, what's going on up here that they have a laboratory in which they're programming for survival in an age of... And it was hard to explain to a person who didn't understand square dancing at all about how it was. When CALLERLAB came into being in 1974, the previous year, Bob Osgood and Stan Burdick and Charlie Baldwin had established a thing called Legacy. And they decided at that meeting that they wanted to get the round dance teachers, because CALLERLAB was on the planning blocks at that point, and they encouraged the formation of Roundalab, which selected a similar name. Bob, can you perhaps share us any additional light other than that on the name of how we came up with CALLERLAB?
Can I get you to come to the front, please, Bob?
Please use the microphone. This is on tape, sir.
I'll even meet you partway. Unfortunately, we don't have a cordless mic, but I can meet you 10 feet down the aisle if I can talk you into coming that far forward. While Bob's making his way forward, one of the things that you're going to find about a CALLERLAB convention, at least I think almost every caller and spouse that comes to one of these finds, is the CALLERLAB convention really gets you pumped up. Usually the best dance every year that I call is the one that immediately follows the CALLERLAB convention, because I am so charged up with enthusiasm for our wonderful activity. And coming to a CALLERLAB convention, despite all the learning that goes on, despite all of the input that you can put into meaningful committee work, is just a great environment for getting your batteries all charged up. Bob?
Thank you. How are you, Greg?
Hi.
Hello, John. Our first real meeting, in order to start an organization like this, we figured we had to have an assembly of people that others would follow. And if we had one leader, say Ed Gilmore, who was terrific, there might be some people that wouldn't necessarily see him as a leader. But if you had Ed Gilmore and Lee Helsel and Arnie Cronenberger and Bob Van Antwerp, there was enough to make a body of knowledge. And we took the Square Dance Hall of Fame that we had at that time and invited 15 of the members who were members at that time to come to Asilomar in the northern part of California and have this experimental get-together and see if we couldn't come up with something. And we did. Out of the 15 who were members of the Hall of Fame, 11 came, and we spent 3 days together talking and deciding what the needs were and how to accomplish meeting these needs. And I think it was Arnie Cronenberger somewhere and said a line, this sounds as though what we really have is a laboratory for study for callers. Let's call it CALLERLAB. And so I give the credit to Arnie, although it's hard to say because there's an awful lot of input. And I think maybe that answers your question. Thank you.
Could you elaborate a little bit more about CALLERLAB and the meeting you had there?
Well,
the question for purposes of the tape by Will Eads from California was, can you elaborate a little bit more on the early years of CALLERLAB?
the problem is not can I elaborate, can I be shut up? From 1961 through the 60s, square dancing was growing in such tremendous propulsion that we found ourselves as a magazine. We were called Sets in Order or Square Dancing Magazine at that time. We were being asked questions that we had to field answers for and go out and get answers. And we didn't feel that a magazine should be the governing thing for a square dance or the leader of it. But we did like the position we were in to pass along the information. So over a period of the 10 years, we had a number of caller conferences that suddenly erupted into this initial meeting. And from it grew... They took over our CALLERLAB took the basic movements handbooks that we had then and several of the programs that we had and took it and made it a Caller Lab thing with a lot of work and committee work, which then represented a body of callers rather than a magazine editorially doing something like this. Now, is that getting close to what you wanted to know? I don't want to usurp this because I know you have a whole program, but let me just say this. I think the one thing that the 11 of us had in common, and then it grew each year, we had 2 meetings in 1971, and then 2 meetings in 72, and each time those of us who were at the meeting could invite one person to become a member of Caller Lab. And for that period until we had our first convention, we had grown to 25 members. So automatically those 25 became the Board of Governors. And we've used 25 as a number of Board of Governors ever since. But I think the one thing that I discovered in common, and this may sound a little strange, but everybody that was in Caller Lab loved square dancing. And we all loved square dancers. And you could have me talking all night, and I won't. But I think that's a little bit of an answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Bob Osgood, California. I want to amplify on one other thing that Bob said when he was talking about people and their love for the activity. As we get into committee meetings, and particularly when we get to the Wednesday morning business meeting of the organization, at those sessions when there are things that are up for a vote, you will have an opportunity to speak your opinion before the vote is taken. You will find opposing viewpoints on issues. In past years, we have had some very opposing viewpoints. It is a very spirited discussions. In most of those instances, people have respected the opinion of the people with the opposing view. They have treated each other as professionals, entitling them to their personal opinion about their personal view. In every case, we know that everybody has the good of the activity of square dancing as a worldwide fellowship activity at heart. But everyone is entitled to their opinion. They are entitled to speak their opinion. And we do so with professionalism, with respect for others, and with a right to disagree, knowing that everybody really has the best of the activity at heart. Yes, sometimes our egos get in the way. But we eventually get to the point where we filter through all of that. We take the information in regard, and we make a decision and vote according to what our experience and what our heart tells us. But it is something that we hope is always done with professionalism and respect for each other. John? Yes. Now, just to make sure you know the quote, it's no badge, no food, no exceptions. So let's all practice it one time here. No badge, no food, no exceptions. Excellent. You are indeed now a great part of the body of Caller Lab. We thank you for coming this evening. It's going to be in this room, is it not? There will be an after-party session beginning in about just 15 minutes. Take a break. Enjoy the convention.